And as I've been talking, you may have thought that pathogen and disease I've been using interchangeably. I hope that I haven't, because we like to say that a disease is the malfunctioning of the host cells and tissues that result from a continuous irritation of a pathogenic agent or environmental factor that leads to the development of symptoms. Compare that to a pathogen, and the pathogen is the actual entity that causes the disease. And so if a lot of you should be familiar with pine wilt disease. Pine wilt is the name of the disease, but it's caused by the nematode pathogen Versiphalanchus xylophilus. And a little bit, two more terms are sign and symptoms. And so a sign will be the actual visible evidence of that pathogen. And so if it's a fungal pathogen, that's actually seeing the mycelia growing, or if we have a conch growing on a tree, like we have on that far picture, that is the actual fungus that's growing out. That is a sign of the disease. Compare that to a symptom, and a symptom is basically the change in function and appearance of the affected plant. And so here we have some spruce needles that are yellowing. We can't see any individual fungal portions on there. That is a symptom. So when we're not able to see the actual pathogen, it's a symptom. And now we'll discuss some of the abiotic diseases that you guys may see. Abiotic diseases can really be caused by any one of these things. So pollution. There are smoke damage can cause issue on some plants. Water issues. If it's too wet, is it too dry? Like that. And again, thinking about just how abiotic diseases, how their symptomology tends to look. Typically, abiotic diseases are more uniform across the landscape than a biotic disease. And also on these abiotic diseases, we may not have very specific symptoms that are showing up. And so it's not going to be individual spots that are a certain color. It may just be a general decline that we're starting to see. And also, with a lot of these abiotic diseases, if you think back to what the weather's been doing prior to injury occurring, you may be able to time that to a specific weather event or environmental event. And also with these abiotic diseases, is they often become much more pronounced with additional stresses. So one that has had to deal with fairly often is just frost crack. The freezing and thawing that occurs within the bark over the course of the winter can cause that bark to crack open. And now here we have a maple tree that has a pretty decent sized crack in the bark, and you can see a bunch of mushrooms that are starting to grow out of that bark. So now this cracking has opened up a site for an infection site for this fungus to attack, and that's now what we're seeing. Another one that I'm sure people are fairly familiar with is root girdling. So if you've kept a plant in the container too long and the roots just have to grow around itself and they kind of circle in and they'll choke themselves, that is root girdling. Unfortunately, oftentimes if you do have a root issue, you don't know. You'll only see issues on the top portion of the plant. If it's a tree, there may just be a general decline, general yellowing that you're seeing of the leaves, and it wouldn't be until you would actually dig that root ball up that you would see, okay, these roots really aren't spreading. They're just constricting around themselves and preventing nutrient absorption the way it should be. Another one is salt damage. Here we have just injury from salt that's been applied to the sidewalk. But more often than not, our salt injury will look more similar to this, where there's just going to be a little bit of burning on the margins of the leaves. And typically with salt injury, it's going to be some of the lower leaves are the first ones that tend to show that burning. Also, with salt damage, another sign of that would be just slow or spotty germination. Or if you do have restricted root development, that can be another one. And one of the nice things about salt injury is you can often just do some excess watering, and that will help leach the salts out of the root zone, and oftentimes the plants will recover. And so if you are seeing pretty severe salt injury, recommend just doing 3 to 4 inches of overhead irrigation, and hopefully that will leach most of the salts out of the root zone to where now the plant can grow in a healthy manner. Another one that we see is a winter injury, and so here we have winter injury on a couple of conifers. But again, just the top portion of the plants, and here, if you look at this, the picture of the Christmas tree farm, most of the trees in that picture are affected by this. So it's fairly uniform across the field. A good indicator that it's an abiotic disease. Another one that you can get is lawnmower blight. So if you mow too close to the trees, may end up nicking the bottom portion of it right at the crown. It's going to what we like to call lawnmower blight. Another one that we got quite a few calls on last year has been herbicide drift. Herbicide drift can look similar to viruses, where you will have just abnormal growth that starts to occur. The other thing that you may see is, as we have in the bottom left picture there, is the leaves are just kind of cupped, and that's a pretty typical sign of a growth regulator herbicide. Another one that I'm guessing most of you guys have seen or will see is sun scald. So sun scald is just caused by, as the name, basically a sunburn to the plant tissues. And one of the things that kind of helps diagnosing sun scald is the sun scald should be most severe in the areas that get the most sunlight. So the areas that don't get a whole lot of sun, you're not going to see sun scald issues there. Fruit cracking is another one, and this is just as the plants are nearing maturity, they may just start to crack. Blossom end rot, everybody's favorite issue with tomatoes. This one is actually caused by a calcium deficiency. And so as the fruit is nearing maturity, there's not enough calcium there for the not enough calcium for the plant to uptake, and we tend to get this the rotted blossom ends of the fruit. Another thing that can exacerbate blossom end rot is if you have very irregular watering schedule. And so if the plants are continuously going through a drought flood stress cycle, that can also increase the amount of blossom end rot that you have. Okay. So we had a question of whether or not sun scald and frost crack are the same thing, and no, they are not. They can look similar on occasion, but no, we do not consider them to be the same thing. Right. Another one that we have is cat face. Again, cat face is just a physiological abnormality that can occur as the fruit is nearing maturity. Sometimes you may just look and you'll see that if you have tomatoes or peppers or something like that you've done some pruning to, you go back out a couple of days later and you see that a lot of the leaves have just kind of rolled in on themselves. Just call that physiological leaf roll. And this occurs primarily when we've pruned more from the plant than we should have. And so we've pruned an amount that is more, basically we pruned more shoot tissue then the roots are able to provide for. And then as the roots are struggling with this, with the less foliage, now we're starting to see these leaves roll. Another one that may have seen, I tend to get this on my tomatoes every year, is just yellow shoulders disorder. Yellow shoulders disorder can affect the taste of the fruit, and so the tomatoes will not taste as good typically if you have yellow shoulders. But this tends to be caused by not having enough potassium in the soil. And one of the issues with yellow shoulders is you really need to make sure that you have the correct amount of potassium at flowering. Once the fruit has started to develop, it's almost too late to do anything to prevent yellow shoulders. And as far as managing a lot of these abiotic diseases, a lot of these management techniques just focus on reducing overall plant stress. So one of the first things we can do is just to have a good fertilizer program. Not applying too much fertilizer, not applying too little, but based off of environment and the plant, applying the correct amount. Also, if you do any staking, proper staking can really reduce the exposure to excessive sunlight. And so you may not tend to get those issues with sun scald if you do proper staking. If you're able to control any biotic diseases, that tends to decrease our abiotic diseases. And so a lot of our foliar diseases will lead to a loss of leaves. Those leaves, as we lose those leaves, the plants have lost some of their photosynthetic potential. So if we're able to control those foliar diseases, that can increase the overall health of the plant as well. Let's cover the soil. So mulching really helps the plants maintain and proper moisture levels. And again, this kind of ties into proper water management. You want to make sure that we're not overwatering or underwatering our plants. Oops. And one thing that we like to think is that most or a lot of plants that we have, they don't really like wet feet. One way that I like to think of them. So especially if we have any potted plants or container grown plants, you want to make sure that those plants aren't sitting and that the bottom of those plant or pots isn't just going to be a soupy mess. So you can put a few pieces of wood at the bottom of the pot, and that will really help some of the water to drain out, especially if there are holes in the bottom of the pot. But really, as far as managing a lot of these abiotic diseases, we just will try to think of anything that we can do that will reduce overall stress to the plants. And I guess any questions about the abiotic diseases that I've discussed or just general pathology? Yes. Yeah. So that was a question about cat face and what causes that. Again, I'm not entirely sure. I think that it's a nutrient issue that causes cat face as well. But yeah, unfortunately, I'm not the most familiar with that one, unfortunately. So one of the questions was, in potted plants, where does the excess salt come from? Well, it can come from a few places. If you've been applying fertilizer to those potted plants, a lot of those fertilizers contain salt or are made of salt, and that can increase the overall salt content. Or if you have hard water, and if you do a lot of kind of very light watering of the potted plant, you're not going to get the water is not going to get all the way to the bottom of that pot, and so a lot of the moisture, including the salts, will remain right up towards the top. And so, really, those salts can come just from your groundwater. How does fruit cracking happen was another question. Fruit cracking tends to happen basically when the fruit matures too quickly. And so again, that's going to be just a function of the moisture levels and nutrient levels. So another question is, can physiological leaf roll be caused by anything aside from pruning issues? We can see physiological leaf roll when there's been a herbicide issue. And so if there's been some herbicide drift that's hit the plants, their leaves may start to curl as well. And yes, and insect feeding can also cause that. What is proper staking? If you are doing tomatoes or some of these other vegetables that it can get pretty large and they may flop over. This is proper staking is making sure that the stem will be, that there's something for the stem to grow up, and so there's some sort of stem support for it. Leaves rolling, tomatoes with leaves rolling on the top that have purple veins. Could be a few things. That could be an insect issue. That could also be herbicide drift would be another issue, or that could be a sign of a virus issue in tomatoes.
Welcome to the world of disease.
Next question was, is soft water a problem with salt damage? And the answer to that is, I am not sure. I do not know. I apologize. We did have one more question in here. So a question about disinfecting tools to prevent the spread of viruses. 10% bleach works really well to disinfect a lot of tools, but I'll cover that a little bit later as well. So, all right. So with that, we will move into some of our biotic diseases.